I'm Elle Sanderson, and I am a special education advocate, and I am a SYNGAP mom. My son is 9 years old, and we have been navigating this. He had his diagnosis in 2017, October of 2017. And at the time when he was diagnosed, they there was nothing out there, no information. Um, and I think his doctor said at the time he was number 500 internationally. So we got this diagnosis, and it was, well, now what? What are we supposed to do now? And there was no answers. And at the time, he was 2, and he was doing what's called an IFSP. And some of you might know what that is. That's where they come in and they make a service plan for you, for your family, for services such as OT, speech, physical therapy, like those services inside the home. And that's from birth to 3. So we were doing physical therapy and occupational therapy and feeding therapy and speech therapy. And he didn't walk till he's 24 months. And we had all of that before we ever even received an epilepsy diagnosis or even the SYNGAP diagnosis. We had the epilepsy diagnosis first, and SYNGAP came after. So fast forward to where he's now in school, and that's when we began the IEP process. And I wish I would have known what I know now. So I am an author of a book. I just released this. This is my most recent endeavor. This is actually, it's a mental toughness book, but it differs from any mental toughness book that you're going to see out there, because this is going to be accessible for anybody, in a way that it's easy to comprehend, it's easy to understand. And my favorite part about it is I actually made the font accessible for anybody who has a vision impairment, for like font size. And I used a font that is known to be able to be read with dyslexia. So that's the coolest thing about my book is it is intended to be accessible for anybody. It's easy comprehension, and that's my most recent endeavor. It does have a section in there where it talks about my son's brain surgery. So he did have a corpus callosotomy in 2020. And so that was really life-changing. And it was a hard discussion for me and my husband to even visit. And that's what kind of has led me to be a special education advocate. So tonight I'm going to share with you what your rights are as a parent, as a caregiver, and in those rights, how we can appropriately advocate for those. So if we go to, this is my little introduction. My name is Elle. I'm your go-to gal for all things special education. And I always do it in fabulous shoes. I had to add that because everybody makes comments about my shoes. So this is why we advocate as parents. What is the reason that you advocate? Is it because you're overwhelmed with the things that you're not receiving for your child? You feel like you're not being heard? Me as a parent, I started out advocating for my own son because, it wasn't fair how he was being treated at school. And I actually didn't know what he was allowed to have in a school setting until I dug a little bit deeper. So students need support, and children with disabilities are vulnerable. Disabilities are often viewed as laziness or unidentified, and they're unidentified. And this one really, it may it may apply to some of our SYNGAP patients, but the pipeline to prison. So the more students can't read by 3rd and 4th grade, the likelihood that of them going to prison as an adult significantly increases. There are 7.1 million plus children on IEPs. 5% or more of students drop out, and 14.7% students don't graduate, and 65% cannot read proficiently by 4th grade. So that's why we advocate. Like I said, this might apply to some of our children, but not as many, because most of our kiddos are pretty much on an IEP. If they're not, they should be. So general education interventions, they can't use those to stall special education evaluations. The severe discrepancy model, those, and this one does apply to our students. And this is what I hear so much. And if you're writing anything down, please write this down. The AAC Act, that is what is going to get your child a talker. So if your child doesn't have a talker and they need one, and the school is saying that they don't have to supply that, that is actually incorrect. And if you look at the AAC Act, that is the act that specifies exactly what students who need AAC and how they are supposed to receive that. So it actually states in the law that if your student needs an AAC device, the school is to provide one from the school, buy one off the shelf, and they can buy 2 devices, one for school and one for home. And I know that this is a huge problem for a lot of our SYNGAP patients. We are not getting AAC devices as we should. So I'm going to skip past this because this is the eligibility. All right, so we're going to talk about procedural rights and safeguards. And how many people in here have their kiddos on an IEP? You guys can like raise your hand if you, I'm going to turn the whole gallery view on so I can see everybody. So a lot of people, kids are already on IEPs. Is there anybody who has been trying to get their student on an IEP and has not been successful, or trying to get services for their student at school and has not been successful? Okay. So these are your procedural rights and safeguards. Every state has procedural rights and safeguards. Every state has state statutes and they have federal statutes. This book is your Code of Federal Regulations. This entire book is all about special education. No state can reduce the benefits of federal law. Your procedural rights and safeguards are outlined in federal law, not state law. They can add to, they can make them more beneficial, but they cannot reduce them. So oftentimes we go into the IEP meeting and they say, here's your procedural rights. Do you have any questions about them? It's a great deal of paper, fantastic reading supplementation if you are tired. Like, who's all heard that spill? Like, here's your procedural rights and safeguards, and they just hand you a packet in your IEP meetings. But has anybody ever actually outlined those and what they are for any of you? I have one hand raised.
No.
No. Okay. So let me tell you what your procedural rights and safeguards are under the federal law. Your procedural rights and safeguards state that you have to receive your procedural rights and safeguards anytime there's a change proposed, anytime that you have to receive them at least once a year. You have to receive them during a due process. You have to receive them anytime that your services are being denied.
So you're supposed to receive those procedural rights and safeguards. And my recommendation for that is the next time you go into an IEP meeting and they hand you that packet and they say, do you have any questions? You're going to say, yes, all of it. I want you to outline every single thing in that, especially my dispute resolution options. Because the moment that you ask them to explain your dispute resolution options in totality, the moment that you ask them to explain your procedural rights and safeguards in totality, everybody at that table is going to now know what your rights are as a parent. And they cannot say, I didn't know that was your right. Yeah, you did. I made them explain what all my rights were according to my procedural safeguards. So you have to receive those. Your parent participation. That does not mean you get to be in the meeting and listen to them talk about your kid. That is not what parent participation is. The IEP process was built on a consensus model, and we're going to hear everybody out, right? So if you go into a meeting and you're by yourself, but there's 7 other people across that table, it is your right to look somebody in the face and say, and how much time have you spent with my child? Why are you in this meeting? There are 5 stakeholders to an IEP. That is the parents, that is a general education teacher, a special education teacher, a diagnostician or someone to read evaluations and interpret those, and someone who can release funds. So that's typically your admin of the building, your LEA, which is local education agent. So those are the 5 stakeholders. If you get in that meeting and you don't have all 5 of those stakeholders, we don't have an IEP team. And not only do we not have an IEP team, we're also denying parents participation, right? Because we're not convening in totality of a team. So parent participation, when you go over your PLAFs, does anybody know what PLAFs are? No? Okay. So PLAFs are your present levels, where they talk about how your student is performing in school. Does Johnny struggle when we go to the bathroom? Does Johnny struggle when he tries to communicate? Does Johnny struggle in a general education setting or at lunch? Or that is what, when we go over PLAFs or PLOFs, it depends on what district you're in. They're called different things, but that's the present levels. When a team goes over the present levels, you should be able to visibly see that child in their setting. If you are only having grades and progress based on percentage in your PLAFs and you can't physically see and visualize that child in their setting, that is not a present level. We need to be able to see what our children look like in school. So when we go over those present levels, that's where parent participation comes in. I'm going to tell them, Raylan really struggles at this time of day because he struggles with stamina, and you'll start seeing him decrease with his stamina after lunch or before lunch. He needs a snack. Those comments go in the present levels as part of parent participation and parent input. So that's what your number 2 procedural rights and safeguards does. Access to educational records. You have access to anything in that school district that has your student's name on it. Anything. Oftentimes we hear, well, we can't send you the bus footage. It has other kids on it. If your kid gets harmed at school and they're telling you that you can't see footage from it, but you know there's footage, you're going to do 2 things. You're going to call Child Protective Services, and then you're going to call the cops, and they're going to investigate, and you're going to do a follow-up email stating why you did those things and sending pictures of whatever it is that your child came home with. If they came home with bruising, if they came home with scratches, you're going to outline that whole incident in an email and call those 2 people. So that parent participation, access of educational records, that also means if your child was on an IEP in 1st grade and they were doing really well, and then they were exited out of their IEP, but you don't have a copy of any of those and you're trying to get them back on an IEP, and you can request all those records. Anything that, and if you can't request the records because there are things that are not included in a FERPA request, which is what this access to educational records is talking about. Anything that's not included in this, you can request in a FOIA request, which is Freedom of Information Act. So that is not an Education Act, that's just separate. So you can ask for any of that in a Freedom of Information Act request. So moving on to does anybody have any questions about those 3 things? Okay, so confidentiality of information. There are people in the school that need to know what's going on with our kiddos. They need to know that our kiddos have a rescue medication in the nurse's office. They need to know that our student needs to be changed in the restroom without anybody else present because they're scared, or there are people in the school that need to know that information. And that information needs to stay with those people. So if you go to church on Sunday and somebody tells you, oh, I heard that your child had this accident at school, why did they have any access to that information? It does not matter if that teacher is a 4th grade, if that person is a 4th grade teacher who has no contact with your student. Just because they're in the school does not mean that they have access to that child. So they have an obligation to keep your child's information confidential. The next one is informed consent. Informed consent is anytime they do evaluations, assessments that they would not do on a general education student, they have to send consent home and you have to sign it. They cannot start evaluations and then say, oh, shoot, we forgot to send you this consent and backdate it. They cannot do that. If they are doing that, that's a problem. They have to have your consent. They can't even call you and say, oh, we did a spot screener with your child's speech and they're doing fantastic and we think that they could do less time. Well, I never agreed to a spot screener for my student. Is that a screener that you do for all gen ed students? If not, we have a problem. We don't evaluate or assess children without parent consent. Another thing about informed consent is if you don't agree with what's going on with the school and you don't agree with the evaluation that they're doing, and it's not what you thought, type it up in an email and say, I'm revoking consent for this evaluation. I no longer want this evaluation. You don't have to explain. You don't have to say why. You don't even have to let them talk you out of it. I'm revoking consent for this evaluation on this date. Please respond and let me know you received this email. We don't do the shenanigans where they're going to say, well, Miss Sanderson, it's this, let me explain what this screener is. If you don't think it's appropriate for your child and you want to revoke the consent, don't let them talk you out of it. Just revoke it. And then if they continue to do it, we'll talk about what you can do in a little bit. Prior written notice. Does anybody know what a prior written notice is? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Prior written notice is the document that you should receive anytime you have a meeting, a discussion, a change, an amendment, a denial of a request, anytime that the district proposes or refuses. Anytime. So if you call them and you say, hey, I think that we need to add a 1-to-1 para. First, you're not going to call, you're going to email. I need to have a 1-to-1 para for my child. And I think that needs to happen. And the school says, well, no, we don't really think, our school doesn't have the funding for a 1-to-1 para. And I know that some of y'all have heard that. We don't have the funding for this, so we can't do that. Then you're going to email them back and say, okay, can you please provide that to me in a prior written notice, that denial in a prior written notice? And then when they say, well, no, I'm just going to tell you, no. If you receive the prior written notice and it doesn't specifically say that they denied you because of funding, then you need to send it back and say, please provide the verbiage for funding for your refusal and your denial of this for my child. Same thing goes for if they are agreeing to something. So say like Raylan needs to have a soft helmet. And I say, can the school provide that? And they're like, yes, absolutely. That needs to go on a prior written notice. The school is agreeing to add a soft helmet to his individual healthcare plan, which ties to an IEP. So that's what a prior written notice is. That outlines everything. It's not the same as the minutes from a meeting or the typed out what we talked about at a meeting. It's denial or proposal. Understandable language. This one is one that we see a lot as an advocate. I see this one a lot. This means not only are we talking about English as a second language interpreters, we need to provide a translator for that parent, and we need to provide those documents, every single one of them, in Spanish or Vietnamese or Chinese, whatever their native language is. We need to provide all of that in an understandable language for them. This also includes a parent who's deafblind or a parent who's blind or visually impaired. Now we have to offer that to them in an understandable language, and that could be Braille. That could be a vision board where it's accessible for them. That could be you need to have somebody speak it to them. If they have understandable language covers a lot. If you don't understand English, it doesn't matter if it's your second language. It doesn't matter if it's because of a disability. They have to provide all documents and interpretation, so verbal conversations in an understandable language. So the independent educational evaluation. This one's a little bit in depth, and the way that I have seen this one executed is terrible. So an independent educational evaluation is when a school does an evaluation on your student and you do not agree with that evaluation. Say that they do a cognitive test and you don't agree with the way the results came out, or it's not what you see. You have the right to disagree with that. You have the right to ask for what's called an independent educational evaluation at public expense. That means you don't have to pay for it. We do really tough things when we, as parents, get all of these things done for our kid by outside evaluators, and we don't require the school to do it. So one of those would be OT. A lot of times I see parents, I had him evaluated by an outside occupational therapist. This is what they said. Here's the report. And the school comes back and they say, well, we don't have to actually take that. that we can take it into a records review, but we don't have to agree with it. And outside therapy is different than public school therapy and blah, blah, blah. So they should do an OT evaluation at the school. And if they come back and you don't agree with it, or you don't agree with the minutes because they have done an evaluation that you don't agree with, you can say, and this all needs to be in writing, I am requesting formally an independent education evaluation. The school has two options. They can either deny that independent educational evaluation, and that's bad news, because if they deny that independent educational evaluation, they then have to take you straight to due process. Does everybody know what due process is? Yes. Okay.
No.
Okay. So if a school denies you this IEE, they have to take you to court to prove why their evaluation is accurate. That is their only option if they deny an IEE. Or they can play nice and they can say, okay, we'll do an IEE. And here's the really important thing to remember. If you're requesting an IEE, they cannot make you explain why you don't think that evaluation is accurate. You do not have to explain yourself. I don't agree with the evaluation. I don't think it really outlines what my kiddos got going on. I'm requesting an IEE. That's all you say. That is it. You don't have to explain. You don't have to say, well, because then that's when the shenanigans happen and that's when they talk you out of it. But in this fancy book that I love so much, and every single one of you should have this as a parent of a child with a disability, I will show you the link of where to find it. It says that they can't require you to provide that explanation. They can ask, and if you deny it, that's it. That's it. That's all they can. You don't have to explain anything to them. So two options. They can deny and then go to due process, and they cannot delay that. It has to happen quick or within a reasonable amount of time. Or they can say, yes, I'll provide you with 4 or 5 different providers that you can do an IEE with. Okay. Stay put rights. And this one actually applies to a lot of our kiddos, because I've got some kiddos that I've been called a couple times about behavior and kiddos being removed from schools. Okay. So stay put rights are if a school is meeting and mediating over an IEP, that IEP that is currently in place stays put. Your child stays put. That means their placement. So if your child gets suspended and now they're trying to propose a different placement for your child, until you go through that hearing and that suspension hearing, your child stays put on their current placement. Their stay put rights means their IEP that they're currently on is where their placement is. That actually means goals too. So if I don't agree to an IEP and the goals, and say we're going to reconvene the team in 3 weeks, that doesn't mean that because the OT wants to move forward and move them out of that goal, that now the OT can do that, but everybody else has to stay put. That means everything on that IEP stays exactly the same. And schools will try to talk you out of, I'm trying to word this in a nice way. They will try to talk you out of keeping an IEP the same and not changing anything because they've already met goals, right? But if you don't agree with everything, we don't change it, right? We're just going to mediate and meet until we come to agreement on an IEP that is sufficient and appropriate for our child. So that's what the stay put rights mean. Your dispute resolution options. You have dispute resolution options. You have options when you don't agree with the school. You have state complaint, you have due process, you have mediation, you can kind of try and keep meeting and you can try to keep conversating over it. You have dispute resolution options, and you should ask them to explain them. If you've never had them explained to you, you should ask them at the very beginning of your meeting when they hand you those procedural rights and safeguards. This is a huge packet and I've tried to understand it a lot. I'd actually like for you to explain my dispute resolution options to me, just in case. Heads will spin. So any questions on those things? Come on, I know you guys got questions.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I honestly cannot say in 21 years of school that I ever read that packet. And it was because it was so overwhelming, and like, I am embarrassed to say that, but I'm sure that I'm not alone and I'm in good company. So,
Yeah.
which is why I admitted that.
Yeah.
Had I
Same
read
here.
that, then I would have really changed the way that I approached IEP meetings and probably been more active than I was, although I thought that I was an efficient advocate for her. I could have definitely done better. So I appreciate you stressing the key points of that packet and the fact that we should all be reading that. But then I also wish that they would provide it in another format that people would be more likely to be able to read and understand,
Right.
A condensed version, something that people could, glean from. Because I'm telling you, when you get handed that packet, as we all know, we're just like, yeah, okay, whenever I have time to read that. But it's so very important, obviously, and I just appreciate you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
And this is Olga. I do have a question. Sorry, I was coming in late because I was trying to find it. We're in a situation right now. I'm in Texas, which is a non-education state, but anyway.
Number 50.
Yeah, pretty sad. Okay, so my son started at the high school, so we do 2 days of that and 3 days of ABA because the school doesn't have ABA, and I'm trying to get the perfect hybrid. But bottom line is, I really don't feel like the school district has ever been able to give him a fair shot at education. We had ABA go in. I've demanded for ABA to come into the school, and we're in that process right now. Of course, there's probably going to still say no. Probably have to go to due process. I don't know. I mean, a lot of our, and I'm bringing this up because a lot of our kiddos, and I'm not sure who all
Have behaviors.
Yes, have behaviors. And, our district is huge. We've got like 15 high schools, and then they have one BCBA that.
What district are you in, if you don't mind?
Cyfair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have they done an FBA?
Yeah, I had an independent one done as well, because the one they did was a joke. So we actually got his ABA school. We were able to hire them as a independent and went in, and they wrote out a report, which made them look really, really bad. I'm giving the high school the benefit of the doubt because we've just started to try to get a few weeks to get settled in, but I'm still want to pursue this. I had a mediocre advocate just for the start of the year, but we're about to come up for our annual ARD, so this is where it's going to come up again. I know they're probably not going to allow private ABA in there because their whole FERPA thing is what they use. But anyway, a lot of our kids are
actually.
Go ahead.
They like to use that word, but I don't think they know what it means.
Yeah.
So my advice when it comes to behavior is the school has an obligation, right, The school has an obligation to provide that student services for their unique circumstances. So some districts have ABAs and BCBAs, some don't. I'd have to look into what exactly Cypher has, but if the district has it and they can provide it, and that's what your student needs, then that's what your student should have.
No, but they don't have it. They have
Okay.
ABCDF that will consult with the teacher. They don't have behavioral technicians. They don't in the schools. They don't have. It's just like it's kind of like how they. It's actually worse than how they do their OT. An OT will come in and tell the teacher what needs to happen, and they'll visit once every 90 days or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
BCBA is kind of similar. I don't really know what he doesn't even have a one-on-one para anymore because they said they can't hire staff. They're not using
That is my favorite.
Okay.
They cannot use that. If your
Well, I
student
know it's
needs,
not my problem. You can't hire staff, right?
that's exactly right. And that's exactly what I would tell them in a meeting. I think it's wildly inappropriate that you're talking about finances and financial decisions in front of my client. And if the data says that this student needs a one-to-one para, then that's what we make the decision based on, not what your funding can do, because it's Texas. And I don't know if you guys follow Special Education Boss in Texas.
No, I don't. I probably should.
I would follow her. She's in Katy district.
Oh, she's right across from me. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, she's in Katy ISD, but she does do all over as well. She's a lot like me. The only difference is I have a kiddo with SYNGAP. I know what those challenges are, like, you know.
Yeah.
But she will tell you, and if you watch her TikToks, she'll say, in Texas, we have big, beautiful football fields.
Oh, I know.
Where's the funding? We pay for the things that we choose to pay for. So I would say in an IEP meeting, it's wildly inappropriate for you to discuss funding with my client. If the data supports that this student needs a one-to-one para for them to have a tape, then that's what the student needs. So
How do you position that though? I mean, what's the basis for having a one-to-one?
So it's going to be based on all of their unique needs. So like some of our SYNGAP patients, they might need a nurse. They might need a nurse and not a one-to-one. So if their seizures are so scary and they're dangerous to where they're having hundreds of them a day, which we know can happen with our kiddos, we need somebody trained effectively in that seizure protocol. I wouldn't want a one-to-one para who has to at least have a high school diploma to administer rescue medication to my child, period.
Yeah.
And those are things that can be delegated. So it just depends on what the child needs. If, say, they're going into a gen ed setting, okay, can they access all that gen ed curriculum and access everything happening in the gen ed setting without a one-to-one para? If they can't, if they need adult support, then we look at a one-to-one para. If they need adult support for mobility, there's a huge range of what qualifies a student for a one-to-one para. And oftentimes we're going to hear, well, we don't want them to get stuck with one person.
Oh yeah. They don't want to.
Shenanigans. We're not going to put a para's name in an IEP. We're not. It's going to be a one-to-one para. And it could be any one-to-one para. That adult support could be anybody that's trained. It doesn't have to be a specific person, and that is a line that they like to use to lie to parents. Well, what if that para is not here? Well, then you call for a substitute para, just like you would call for a substitute art teacher. You're going to call for a substitute. You can do the same thing. So when it comes to requesting a one-to-one para, I would look at what the child needs before I would make that decision. So if it's a one-to-one para for behavior, okay, what does that look like? And if the school's not taking data on that, if you haven't asked them to take data on that, they're not doing it.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yep. So
I just went through that with them. I said, okay, where's the report I'm supposed to, we talked about at the beginning of the year. Now because I have to you have to handhold them and make them accountable.
Yep.
On everything. It's
everything. So, a lot of times I've seen that our families are getting these daily notes. All great information. We need to know when our child goes to the bathroom. They don't talk. We need to know if they had an epilepsy episode. We need to know if they ate or not, or if they're hydrated, because those are things that they don't do. So we need to know those things. But on top of needing to know those things, we also need to know what their behavior looked like. And if we are getting daily notes, we need to keep those. So we can then come back to the IEP and say, I know you guys didn't collect data on what their behavior looks like daily, but I did. Every day. My student was sent home on this date and they threw a cup at another student's head. It's nowhere in your behavior referrals.
This data collection issue for behavior is actually what I was able to use to win our lawsuit. And this kind of goes into what you're saying, where they have yours has a BCBA, mine doesn't even BCBA, but they didn't know how to collect behavior data. So even when they would tell me something that was going on with Jaden's behavior, that's all they were telling me is what Jaden did.
Yeah,
well, any of us who have ever had a single day in ABA know that's absolutely worthless information to me. They didn't know how to collect ABC data, and so they couldn't do it. And because of that, that's how I got to be able, they had to contract with my BCBA, allow to pay her to do the FBA, pay her to develop a behavior intervention plan, pay her to come in at least weekly for fidelity check, pay her to train all their staff on how to collect the data.
And those are options that we can visit as an IEP team. The problem is they're not telling parents what options are even available to them. They're not helping parents understand that, okay, well, now we have an FBA, but well, now what do we do? Do we create, what does a behavior intervention plan look like? What do these things look like to provide my child a FAPE? I'm sorry, but if your child, I'm really sorry that you have to pull your child out of school 3 days a week to do ABA because the school's not doing their job. That breaks my heart.
Yeah. I mean, there's no consistency across the board.
Yeah. That breaks my heart because now your child's missing out on instruction 3 days a week. That is.
Well, I'm at the point as like, do I just throw in the towel and just pull them out and put them in ABA full time, or do I go to court and try to prove that they're not? Have
you filed any complaints?
No, I've just gone through the process of it took me 1.5 years just to get to the independent FBA.
Okay, so here's my recommendation. You and I hop on a Zoom and we can talk about it because
I know it's a separate, it's just our whole SYNGAP behavioral educational, what state does do it right.
And it's something that, because have they done a sensory profile? Have they met his sensory needs?
No. Yeah.
No. And what happens when our kids' sensory needs aren't met? We're going to trigger some things, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they're going to go wild.
Yeah, we're not providing that child a FAPE because we have denied them we have denied and harmed our children, the school has, by not doing things such as FBAs, behavior intervention plans, sensory profiles, really looking at that expressive language and seeing if the current AAC device doesn't work for him. Does he have an AAC device, or is he
Yes.
verbal?
Yeah. No, he's nonverbal. Most
Does
of
he
our kids
use his AAC device appropriately?
only when prompted. He does at ABA, but at school, I'm not sure. I've asked them to use it.
Yeah, so probably not. So those are other things. So, and is the behaviors that are they happening at school more than they're happening in any other setting? Because if that's what's happening, then we need to look at that setting for him and see why there's such a huge skew of difference between the two.
Yeah, no, I've heard everything in the book, but we all have. I know it's.
Yeah. So
We
you had
we
an
need a
advocate.
SYNGAP
Was it
plan. Pardon?
you had an advocate though?
No, she's not. She's the fox watching the hen house. I've figured out. She did tell me that she would only do so much, and after that I would have to go to either a law firm or one of the tiger advocates.
Okay. Well, your tiger advocates are going to be, there's one right there in Texas for you.
Oh, Lou Geigerman? No,
No,
I don't know.
Karen Mayer Cunningham.
Oh, I have heard that name. Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
need to look. Thank you.
Yes, Karen
I'm
Mayer
sorry, I didn't-
Cunningham. Or I can always advocate for SYNGAP patients as well.
Oh, okay. That's good to
Yeah,
know.
and I'll give you that information at the end. I'll give you guys all my information.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to
No, that's okay, Olga.
hijack
That's
the
what she's,
conversation.
that's
No,
what she's here for, and you can benefit all of us by hearing what you're struggling with so that we know how you've dealt with
Okay.
it and what to avoid or what to implement. I
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
wanted to add though, Olga, that you asked whether or not you should just throw in the towel or, try to pursue it and get the education he deserves. I want to say personally that when Michaela turned 20, it was so difficult getting her to go to school because of her behaviors, and then she would have behaviors at school, and then of course it happened also when COVID happened, so then we were having issues with that. And so I finally did come to the conclusion that I was like, she is not being helped more than she's being hurt by this whole situation, so we are just going to throw in the towel. So I just want you to know that that is a valid question and you are not alone in that decision, but I would hope that he gets the most education that he can before that happens, because I will give you the flip side, and that is looking ahead to when they graduate and your child is home, and that is where their education stops, unless you pick up the torch and carry it on and try to implement stuff at home, which, take it from me, is very difficult. So that's just about that.
Heather, how old's your daughter?
And I would add,
She's
I would add
22.
too, I would add too that I think it'll be different for each one, and that if our Syngapians have the ability to communicate with us, kind of what their wishes are, especially at that older age, is when we gauge it. Because I can promise you, if Jaden wasn't like begging to go to school, even if there's a 3-day weekend or something, and freaking out that there's no school, I would not be fighting as hard. I would have absolutely been like, you know what, this is too much stress and I don't need this, and just pulled her out. It is only because Jaden very clearly wants to go to school that my choices were either to take her out and have her miss out on something she's eligible for because they're so awful, or go through all the stress of making them do their jobs. And it certainly is a lot of stress for any parent that goes through that process. So I'd let your kid guide you whether it's worth it.
I know, and we shouldn't have to say. I mean, I am hearing vibes, Heather, as you were mentioning too, and that I thought kids were automatically guaranteed to be in school till they were 21 or 22. I'm hearing a lot of vibes where now you have to prove that it's whatever kind of program they have in the school will actually benefit the child after they turn 18 or graduate.
Is your child on alternative assessments?
I don't believe so.
Are they excluded from statewide or district-wide testing?
They do an adaptive test. Does that make sense? Is that what you just
Yep.
asked?
They're
they do
excluded.
an
They're on
adaptive-
alternative,
Yeah.
which means they go to school till they're 21.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
it's where, and it's another district too in the area that has, a parent has expressed concerns. So, okay, I will,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm definitely going to take your information down and
Are any one of y'all's kids on 504? Good God, I hope not.
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
What is that?
Section 504 is it's an American with Disabilities part. So it's more like about accommodations than modifications. There's no specialized instruction. So typically IDEA is going to absorb all of those section 504s. Section 504 is governed by OCR, which is Office of Civil Rights. So I would imagine that your children are not on 504s. And if they are on 504s, you also need to call me. I will skip over that piece. So this is going to be gold for you guys. This piece of information is going to be gold. So what services are your kids receiving in school? You guys can just go ahead and rattle some of them off.
Music therapy.
Awesome.
Occupational therapy and music therapy. But the
Yeah.
occupation
POT and
once a
speech.
month.
Someone said speech.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
PTOT and speech.
Okay. That's typically what we see is PTOT and speech. How many of your kids have to get medication while they're at school? Or, yep, or nursing, anything they need to go to the nurse for.
If seizures occur, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to go over what those related services look like for children with disabilities and on IEPs. Do you see this
Jaden has
long?
to go to the nurse every day, but we've also had her in-class staff and paras med certified and put a med box in the classroom and train them all. And then the nurse actually has to log the official MAR at the end of the day. But if they are med certified staff, they can provide that information to the nurse for her to put it into the system at the end of the day. But we just did that to make it more accessible so that Jaden doesn't always have to walk this long distance to the nurse every day for her medications.
Okay. So we're going to, and that's fantastic. I wish that a lot of schools did that, but they don't. We're going to talk about those related services. And I think that this actually helps with some of those behaviors that our kids have in school, right? So audiology services, those are hearing assessments and interventions, counseling services, emotional and behavior support. So our students can go to a social worker to work on social emotional. They can have an assessment for this related service of counseling services. Has anybody ever been offered that? Probably not.
No.
Yeah. Early identification and assessment. So early detection of disabilities, med services. So that's kind of what Jackie was talking about just now. So diagnostic or evaluative medical services, occupational therapy. That's the one we see a lot. Orientation and mobility services. Does anybody's kiddo have CVI or vision impairment?
I know a lot of the kids we
Have strabismus, and
it's probably undiagnosed, but I'm
Okay.
most of
sure
it.
there are a lot of kids that have it.
So this is this is a service that they can be evaluated for. Orientation and mobility services. And what that means is how a student orientates themselves around their environment. So if your student has CVI and they can't see out of this eye, and for those who don't know what CVI is, that's cortical visual impairment, that's brain-eye connection. And that happens when our kiddos have a lot of seizures. That kind of damages that brain-eye connection. So if they can't see anything on this side, how are they going to know that there's a doorpost there? Right? They're not. So that orientation and mobility is how your student ambulates around their environment with their vision impairment, or say they're deaf blind. That's another. So orientation and mobility services, parent counseling and training, educating parents on special needs. How many of you have ever been offered in-home training about your child's disability from the school district?
Nope.
Only when we went to arbitration on something. It took years, and I had to go back and remind them that they were obligated to do it.
I think I would just be happy if I found a school that we didn't have to train them and we could just call it a draw.
Yeah. So this is the most important related service that a school can provide a parent. Parent counseling and training, because they're going to train you on how to navigate your child's disability and their needs in your home. So if you're not receiving that, I recommend that you ask for it. And here's a little nugget of information for you. If your child's already on an IEP, they cannot deny you further testing. If you request an evaluation for something, okay, we'll do that. They can't deny you further data collection. They can, and they better provide it in a prior written notice, because I'm going to eat them alive with that. Parent counseling and training. If you don't have it, ask for it. Physical therapy, obviously. Psychological services, mental health assessments and intervention. I know that y'all probably aren't getting that. Recreation. So this is music therapy, art therapy, those type of recreational therapeutic services. Rehabilitation counseling. So vocational and independence training. This is that after high school training that you can get. So it can happen in any part of school, but this can happen. This independence training can happen in high school. That's why it really makes me sad that your student is out of school 3 days a week, because there's so much that they could be doing, right? School health services and nurse services. If your student receives any kind of nurse, anything, those services need to be in the IEP. So if your student goes to the nurse twice a day for medication, that actually needs to be in the IEP for the minutes as a related service. So exactly where your OT and your speech go and how many minutes they receive. If your student sees the nurse for 15 minutes in order to receive their medication, that needs to go in the IEP. Social work services. So this is social and familial support. So it's not the same as counseling services. And oftentimes parents are told social work services is the same as counseling services, and they're actually two different things. Speech and language pathology services. Transportation. If your student needs to be transported by the school district, they need to have a transportation plan attached to their IEP. They do not just get on a bus without a plan. So that transportation plan has to be attached to their IEP, and that is a related service as well. Assistive technology services. So a lot of times we think our AAC devices that we're using with our kiddos, they're talkers, but this also includes low tech. So if your student needs a gait trainer, that's assistive technology. If your student needs, say they have cochlear implants and they need a specific microphone, that's assistive technology. So the next one is interpreting services. So that is communication and facilitation for hearing impaired. So sign language interpreter. Any questions on those? Okay, we're going to go over these. I'm going to tell you some laws that you guys should know. It's going to help you understand your rights as a parent. And if you guys want, I can do a follow-up email with this information to Heather, and then Heather can distribute it, or I can put it in the chat, or whatever you guys would think is the best way to get this information to you guys, or I can even give you a call.
We are going to have this recording posted on the website, so it will all be there, but you
Perfect.
can, yeah.
Okay, so IDEA, this is what governs our IEPs. This is the most important federal law when it comes to special education. So the interesting thing about IDEA is that everyone seems to forget that it's a federal law. And we hear a lot of, we don't do that here. You do. It's federal. The important thing to remember is if it is outlined in IDEA, your state can't reduce the benefit of that. So, for instance, I hear sometimes that schools use the multi-tiered system of support to decide if they're going to evaluate a student. They actually cannot use that, and it's outlined that they cannot use general education interventions to deny a student an evaluation. So if you don't know what IDEA law is, I highly recommend that you dive into it and really, really understand it. And I'm going to say this, unless your attorney is a special education attorney, not a family law attorney, not a human development attorney, a special education attorney, their knowledge on special education is probably not that great. Because the law is so big, there are very few lawyers, family lawyers, who specifically specialize in IDEA. So if you're going to look for an attorney, do your homework and make sure that they know IDEA law and they know IDEA law. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So remember I said that that's governed by OCR. So all of our students on an IEP, we've now absorbed Section 504 with that IEP. So we're not discriminating against our child at all for their disability. And that's what Section 504 is. Anything that is federally funded cannot discriminate against a child with a disability or anybody with a disability. That's what Section 504 is. And ADA. FERPA is Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. You guys, you have the right to all of your students' records. all of your students' records. If they have your student's name on them, you have the right to those. If you can't receive them in a Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, you can receive them in a FOIA request, which is Freedom of Information Act. The next one is the Every Student Succeeds Act. This used to be called the No Child Left Behind Act. And that is kind of the part where I was telling you about if your student's on alternative testing. This is the law that governs that. So McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, if your student and you are homeless, they are still entitled to an education. So this law outlines what these programs and shelters can do. I don't know this law in depth, so I can't tell you a lot about it. But if your student and you have experienced homelessness at all, this is where you're going to find that information, and you can ask the school to provide this law to you.
I have a question on that. I don't know if you know it or not. I haven't come across this yet, but I would be curious, like, if a person is experiencing homelessness and with the school, every time you register, they require these multiple forms to prove your residency. Would this obviously would exempt them from that then, I suppose.
Correct.
Like, so
Correct.
somebody could register even if they didn't have
Exactly.
residency?
Exactly. So what was happening is we're denying children to be in school because they don't have documents. And somehow for instance, my husband's military. I have lost my children's important documents probably in 2 moves. I have had to request birth certificates every single time. And last year they kept harping on me because I lost them last year. And they're like, we need their birth certificates in order for them to register. They cannot go to school without them. They cannot go to school without them. They cannot go to school. They can. Because under this act, it actually has some information about waiting for documentation, proof of documentation. I'm not exactly sure. There's another law and guidance for highly mobile students. So students experience homelessness, and then students also who are military, oil field workers, ones who move a lot, and what the educational products should be in their moves. So like I said, I'm not super familiar with this law or the highly mobile, but I do know that these laws protect students who don't have documentation. So I don't think it's like a forever thing, but I think they have a window of time, or they have to be provided with resources to look for those documents. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
We all know what HIPAA is. It actually doesn't exist in schools. So if they tell you we can't do that because of HIPAA doesn't exist in schools. Now, the one thing that I will say is that, and this is a training that I took that kind of elaborated on this. I knew a little bit about it, and then I took this training, and it was a little mind-blowing to me. When the Medicaid form is presented to students or to parents to sign, do you have Medicaid? This is so like if we need anything, we can have Medicaid pay for it. Don't ever fill that out. And if you have, you can revoke it. And I'm going to tell you why. 1, the school can provide it. 2, now your child's social security number is going to be all over those school documents because it's tied to their Medicaid number, which is then all over their documents. So unless you want your entire county to know your child's social security number, I would not sign that. I also would not give them the right to bill Medicaid. They can do everything without billing Medicaid. That's
an additional thing to be very careful with that is Medicaid prohibits double billing. So, for example, if you do have, you know, a VCBA in school and they're billing that VCBA under your Medicaid, you cannot have a VCBA outside of school. Or if you have speech therapy, you know, so you, in those cases, you definitely want to be very careful to make sure that you're not prohibiting from being able to access these services outside of school.
Absolutely. And another piece to that is, we had a provider here that the school decided that that was the placement for the child. She was billing the school for her services and Medicaid. So then she was double dipping, and children were actually not receiving their education at all. They were not receiving a FAPE. So they were stuck in this facility, for lack of better terms. They were stuck in this facility all day long, supposed to be receiving educational benefit and product, but they never did. It was like an overglorified daycare, and she double billed the school district and Medicaid. So this is something that was added to our procedural safeguards, is the schools utilizing insurance and what that looks like for parents, and how parents can say that they don't want that. So I would really highly recommend that you don't agree to that. And if you have agreed to that and you're interested in revoking that, and you just type it up in an email, I would like to revoke consent to bill Medicaid, and you send it to their case manager or the admin. So that's how you revoke consent. I also recommend that you look into your state's educational standards and your state's special education law. So in Wyoming, that's Wyoming Chapter 7. And our Wyoming Chapter 7 is like this big. It's tiny. I think it's like 21 pages. Because this, there's really, now I do know that Michigan has like a fairly lengthy restraint and seclusion law and outlines that. I do know that New Jersey has, so sometimes schools will have like these extra laws to protect your student, and those are totally okay. It's okay to add to it, but they cannot reduce it. And then bullying and truancy laws. So I don't know, like Raylan, he does miss a lot of school because he gets sick very easy. So I've never been hit with truancy, and I've never really had to prove that he was sick because he is medically compromised. I don't know how many SYNGAP patients that would apply to, but I do recommend that you know those laws for your state.
Could I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So my son, he is 6, he's in 1st grade, and we just moved to a new school district, and we've kind of had a little bit of issues, but he may have like behaviors in the morning, or we've been through like a really hard process lately of medication changes and agitation and everything. So he has missed a lot of end of last year, and it's gotten a lot better. But the school at one point last year said something to my husband like, hey, these handwritten letters aren't enough. Like, you're going to be looking at truancy or some form of that. And so we went to his neurologist, and we got the neurologist to write a note saying like, any tardies, like he's excused, like these are part of his diagnosis. And so we have that, we sent that to the school, do we need to try and put that like in his health plan or in his IEP?
Yeah. So, you could have accommodated attendance. Absolutely. And the next time they tell you that, I would say, can you provide me that guidance? That paper with that guidance? Because guidance is typically shenanigans. Policies are going to be things that we can print out, that we can read. And a paper note from the doctor is more than a sufficient note. They don't need an explanation on everything. They need to know that he was excused by the doctor. That's what they need to know. So if your doctor does a handwritten note, by all means, that's fine. Is it like a letterhead and it has, or like a form that the doctor has that has the doctor's office's information on it?
Yes. So now we have it like with their letterhead and everything. And the principal actually called the doctor and was like saying like, oh, he's missing way too much. And like, she didn't even contact us before going straight to the neurologist.
Did you sign a release of information for that?
I don't think so. Like on the neurology note, it said like, if you have any questions or concerns, here's our number.
Okay.
But that was
They
like,
still
so
have to have,
unprofessional.
yeah, they still have to have a release of information. So if that were to happen, as an advocate, I would say I'm greatly concerned that you reached out to my clients, or as a parent, you could say, I'm greatly concerned that you reached out to my son's neurologist without consent. And I'm greatly concerned that you're like, and this is something that I'm going to try and nail and be nice about it. Stop answering the phone. Do not answer the phone. If the school calls you and it's an emergency, they're going to call you back. If the school calls you and it's shenanigans, they're not going to leave a message. They're not. If it's an emergency, they're going to call you back and they're going to call your emergency contact. Stop answering the phone. Send them an email. I saw that you called, but my preferred method about anything not emergency related is email.
Okay.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be black and white. And say like it's ingrained in you, like it's ingrained in me to pick up my phone and say, oh, is Raylan okay? Our kids are medically compromised. It's ingrained in us to pick up the phone because we want to protect them, right? And if you do that, by all means, that's totally okay. This is my recommendation. You immediately get on your email on your phone and you say, I am following up on the conversation. These are the points in which I understood. Can you please let me know if I misunderstood? You're going to follow up every conversation that you have in person or on the phone. You're going to provide that in an email because you need to, especially with our kiddos who are nonverbal, you need to prepare like you're going to court. Always, always. You need to have documentation like you're going to court. Everything needs to be in writing. That means the shenanigans about them telling you that the letterhead's not great, it's not going to be sufficient, and they're missing too many days. Okay, great. You going to do homebound schooling? Because if you're not going to provide a solution, then don't call me. Stop letting them call you. Just, if I leave you with any information tonight, get it in writing. Get it in writing and don't answer phone calls. And if you do by accident, it's okay. Follow up in an email. Any other questions?
Good stuff.
I have
Okay.
one other question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, just quickly on, you were talking about filing with the insurance or Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
How do you research whether they've actually filed or not. I didn't see anything, I think, on the claims aspect, but I do know that they were supposed to be doing speech services last year, and the speech therapist refused to do them.
Okay, so if you have agreed to them billing Medicaid for services,
Yes,
it will be on your claims.
it would be on the claims.
It would be on the
just like
claims.
from the
Yep.
school district.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it would be in the school district's records too.
And if they've billed and they weren't they were just telling the teacher how to do it because they didn't want to work with the child. Is that
the private speech therapist?
No, this is the school speech therapist.
Oh.
I was just curious if they were breaking the law on that, but okay. Okay,
no,
so
I mean, if you've given them consent, it's not necessarily illegal for them to bill speech.
Okay, even if they're not providing the service correctly.
Oh no,
Well,
if they are not.
There is a difference between consultation and direct services. So if they're, and there's units that they're billing. In Medicaid, it's done by specific units.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're giving the teacher a 10-minute consult, but they're billing for a 45-minute direct session, then yeah, that's still fraud.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Is that what you were asking?
I'm sorry. That
okay. Yep.
Yes. No, that. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. And so if you feel like they are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, I would recommend that you ask for you do an open records request.
Okay. That's
yeah.
And are you saying that these things are written into the ID? Like it's written in the ID that they're supposed to have a certain amount of speech therapy per week, and that they're supposed to have a 1-to-1? Are you keeping record of how much that has not been done? Because you are then
I have
eligible for compensatory services for all of that.
Yep.
She actually, she had no problem telling me in the meeting that she was no longer doing. She didn't ask me. She just informed me.
They don't get to do that.
I know. She's a brand new well, she was fairly new right out of.
Is any of that in writing? Is any of it in a prior written? Okay. They're going to shoot themselves in the foot by providing you a prior written notice, because they'll just type it up. We didn't agree on this. They'll just type it up. So for how you can contact me. So these are, I do a live, I just kicked this off live. It's called Laws and Lattes, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at 2 p.m. and it goes on my podcast. So Laws and Lattes is, we're going to talk education laws. I'm not an attorney, but I do just bring light to the laws that we have to protect our children. So that's what that is. You can find me on Facebook under Rising Star Advocacy. You can find me on Instagram, Rising Star Advocacy, and TikTok is Advocates in Pink. So my email is Elle@risingstaradvocacy.com. You can check out my website. There's some information on there. It is newer, so it's still like working on. I'm better with social media than I am website. And then if you need me as an advocate, you just shoot an email over to my email and I will tell you the process of that. Does anybody have any questions about anything else that we talked about?
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Our kiddos with SYNGAP are at a disadvantage, and our parents of children with SYNGAP are at a disadvantage. We are burned out. We are operating on 2, 3, maybe an hour of sleep at night because our kids don't sleep. Our kids have significant medical conditions that constantly have us at doctors. We are navigating insurance companies, and some of our children need assistive devices, oxygen. Raylan has oxygen. He has a wheelchair. He has a gait trainer. They're the iceberg of overwhelm that we experience as SYNGAP parents is nothing. Like, we just cannot compete with school districts alone. We just can't. They are going to walk on you and try to manipulate you. And I love teachers. I do. I love Raylan's life skills teacher. She's the sweetest person. And I do believe that most teachers, especially life skills teachers, self-contained teachers, special education teachers, most of those teachers have good souls and good spirits, and they genuinely want the best for our kiddos, but they don't have the training, nor do they have the resources from the admins to give those things to our kids. So without us complaining about it or advocating for that, it's not going to happen. And it's nothing personal against the school district. It's nothing personal against the teacher. It has everything to do with, I have one Raylan. And if something happens to my one Raylan, no matter how big or small, I'm going to be heartbroken. And as parents, that's the reality that we deal with, especially SYNGAP parents. So that's kind of my little spill on it. And if you guys need anything, please feel free to reach out.
Well, I want to say that I appreciate you, and I'm sure that everybody else does, but I appreciate the way that you took the information and you gave us real life examples and helped us to understand how to implement it in our own IEPs. And so it wasn't just this knowledge that someone else could use, but that we could all apply. And so that was very helpful. And I would say that your advice and recommendations have been helpful throughout. And I definitely appreciate your time and your heart for us and others that have special needs kids and trying to deal with the school system.